We're recapping day one of an exciting New York Giants draft, plus we're previewing day two here on the LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. Patricia Trainer here with you. And folks, are you smiling? You better be smiling because the Giants had an absolute amazing day one of the NFL draft, picking up two key players, folks. Edge Kayvon Thibodeaux, offensive tackle Evan Neal at 5 and 7 respectively. Could it have gotten any better than that? Seriously, could it? Could it have? I don't think it could have. But anyway, that's what we're going to talk about on today's show. We're going to talk about the picks. We're going to preview day two. And then I'm going to be joined by Max Torres. He's going to come on and he's going to talk a little bit about Kayvon Thibodeaux. So that is the lineup on today's show. And normally, I thank you for making us your first listen of the day or your first watch of the day, but since we're coming to you a little bit later than usual with the show, and I apologize for that, folks. One person, and I'm trying to do 50 million things, but I'm here. I didn't forget about you. I would never do that. We're trying to get caught up and get this show out to you, so hope you will enjoy the podcast all the same. So, all right, let us talk about the exciting New York Giants draft haul on day one. Now, it's only two players. I understand it, but they are two players that fill a need. And let's start off with Kayvon Thibodeaux. That was a pick. And listen, I've got to tip my hat to General Manager Joe Schoen, by the way, who thus far has done a wonderful job, I think, of rebuilding this roster. You know, he's shown patience. He's cut out, listening to the outside noise. There was some question about whether Thibodeaux had some character issues regarding his work ethic and whatnot. Shane really did his due diligence with the young man, learned about him, saw for himself, and lo and behold, here he is. Kayvon Thibodeaux is a Giant, and I am absolutely so thrilled that he is. He was one of my favorite defenders in this class. I didn't think the Giants were going to have a chance at him, but I am so glad he's here. So let's talk about Kayvon Thibodeaux and what he brings to the New York Giants. Now, you have probably heard me many times say on this program that the Giants need a Batman pass rusher, meaning a guy that is probably going to draw double teams, probably is going to keep opposing offensive coordinators up at night, probably is just going to be, if you will, the lead dog on that defense. And Kayvon Thibodeaux can be all that and more. Now, it's interesting because I've been covering the Giants for quite some time, as you guys know. And the last time I can honestly say that the Giants defense really had a swagger, really had an attitude, if you will, had a lead dog, I'd have to go back to 2011, that Super Bowl defense when they had, Antrell Roll on that team and a few other guys on that team who just brought the swagger and the attitude. And I just felt that over the years, that swagger and attitude started to disappear from the Giants defense. Some players did try to bring it. I don't want to diss those who were on the roster after that, but it just wasn't the same. And part of that swagger is a belief in yourself. And I think that's something Thibodeaux clearly has and brings to the table. There's that confidence, that swagger, that he can be great, that he's willing to work at it to be great. Joe Schoen mentioned that Thibodeaux is a hard worker, a guy who doesn't take anything for granted, who does a lot of stuff behind the scenes that doesn't, that a lot of people don't know about, that he doesn't get credit for. And, just the type of personality for this locker room. This is a locker room, a culture that is being rebuilt, that needs guys who are willing to come in early, stay late, do all the little things behind the scenes. And I know Kayvon Thibodeaux hasn't played a single down for the Giants yet, but I can't tell you how excited I am that he is on this roster. I think he brings so much and more to this Giants defense. Now, when you couple that with what the Giants already have, they have Azeez Ojulari, who projects to be one of the starting outside linebackers, along with Thibodeaux. The Giants finally have a pass rush that I think we can get excited about. I mean, we've seen flashes of it in the past, and we've seen defensive coordinators like Patrick Graham try to manufacture a pass rush. I don't think they're going to have to do that anymore. I think they now have guys who can legitimately push the pocket, rush the passer, and get into that backfield and be pesky to the quarterback. So I'm really excited about it. Thibodeaux, to me, as well as Ojulari, represent a new line of Giant homegrown defensive pass rushers that the team kind of lost sight of after they traded away Jason Pierre-Paul. The Giants got away from drafting more so, and we're relying on free agents to kind of fill that void. And in drafting Thibodeaux this year and Azeez Ojulari last year, they're getting back on track on replanting the seeds and instilling that greatness. And it's interesting because Thibodeaux spoke about how Michael Strahan is a mentor of his. And Strahan, of course, was a homegrown Giants defensive pass rusher, Hall of Famer, as everybody knows. And how cool is it going to be for Strahan to get in this young man's ear and talk about the importance, the history, the pride behind the Giants defenses, the great Giant defenses that Strahan himself witnessed, when he was young and he came up through the ranks. So very important for the Giants, and a really big move on so many levels. Now, what about from a football perspective? Because after all, that's what this is all about, right? Thibodeaux is athletic. He's got strong hands. He can separate from blockers. He's got great explosion. He has a tremendous burst off the line, twitch. He's at his best, I think, as a wide, when he's aligned wide. Just really quick. He's going to be a pest to deal with. And just the size, the strength, all the intangibles he brings to the game. I mean, I can't wait to see how Don Martindale uses Kayvon Thibodeaux in that defense. I think it's just going to be spectacular. Now, there are, little things that he needs to work on, coachable things, all stuff that's very coachable. But Thibodeaux, I'm very optimistic about this young man, and I really think he's got the potential to be the next great pass rusher in New York for the Giants. He and Azeez Ojulari, really like those two. And then let's not forget about the other guys that they have at pass rusher. Ellerson Smith, we'll find out what they have in him this spring and this summer. Quincy Roche, we're going to find out more about him. So just really excited, because I've always said that the Giants need to have at least 3 good, solid pass rushers. I think they have 2 for sure. We'll find out if they have a 3rd as we go on in the spring and summer training camp. All right, let's talk now about Evan Neal. Now, Evan Neal, initially I had him as my top prospect for the Giants at offensive tackle. Then there came some word about some medical concerns, which Joe Schoen kind of cleared up. He said something like 8% of the teams had questions about Neal, medically speaking. That being said, the Giants apparently weren't one of them. They did their due diligence on him. They liked what they saw. And the thing that I've always liked about Evan Neal, besides the fact that he has experience playing right tackle, is that he could play left tackle, and he can also play some guard if you need him to. So the Giants got basically 3 players in one, if you think about it, with Evan Neal. Now, Shane and Brian Dable did say that Neal will compete to start at right tackle. I mean, barring anything funky happening, he's going to be the starter. Let's call it for what it is. And Evan Neal is a big, strong, tall offensive tackle with great length. He's got a fiery demeanor. Obviously some little things that he has to work on, like pad level. Obviously, he's got to be more consistent with that. His technique's got to be a little bit more consistent with that. But there's a lot to like about Evan Neal. And most of all, you can probably make a case and say that the Giants' first pass or first draft of this offensive line, this revamped offensive line, is a lot better than what they had in the past. Now, I spoke earlier about Joe Schoen and the job he's done. And Shane was actually asked about the offensive line. And he said, look, actually, let me backtrack. He was asked if the offensive line is better now. And Shane very modestly said, they haven't put their pads on, which they haven't. So he wasn't going to make any declarations about, okay, the offensive line is set, it's finished, done, next project. But, and by the way, I thought that was very humble of him, unlike last year when we were being told by the Giants that this offensive line was going to be good, before they even put the pads on. I mean, come on. So I like the fact that there's modesty. There's also modest optimism about the offensive line. Now, there's still work to be done, obviously. Guys have to have their techniques smoothed out a little bit. New offensive line coach Bobby Johnson is going to coach these guys up in the techniques the way he wants to see it done, the way Dable wants to see it done. And they're probably going to want to add a few young pieces to the offensive line to build that up somewhat. So all guys so far, between the veterans and the young guys they've added, the offensive line on paper does look much better. But again, as Shane said, let's get the pads on and then we'll see what we're talking about with the offensive line. So in sum, folks, I give this first round of the Giants draft class an A+, and it's been a long time since I've been able to do that. They address two huge needs on their roster, and wow, I feel like Christmas came early with these picks. I'm that excited about it. All right, so what's ahead for the Giants on day 2? I'm going to tell you about that coming up next. And also coming up a little later on today's pod, Max Torres is going to join me, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Kayvon Thibodeaux. That's all coming up on the LockedOn Giants podcast. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. Shady Rays products feature polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Plus, never have to worry about your purchase, as Shady Rays offers a protection program covering lost and broken glasses no matter what. So head on over to Shady Rays today to check out their extensive collection of offerings and use our special promo code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. Shady Rays products are backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews, and they donate 10 meals to fight hunger in America for every sale made. Hit them up today. You can see here my pair of Shady Rays. I absolutely love this pair of glasses, and I wear them quite often, actually. So anyway, hit them up today and use that promo code LOCKEDON and grab your new shades at Shady Rays. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I am Patricia Traina. Thank you so much for your patience while I work through a ton of stuff to get you content out on Giants Country, as well as to get you this podcast. And as a reminder, don't forget we have Max Torres is coming up on today's show. We're going to talk Kayvon Thibodeaux in a little bit more detail, so that's coming up in just a bit. But first, I want to preview day 2 of the draft and what the Giants may or may not do, and give you a few names to maybe keep an eye on. Now, the Giants, I think we can all agree they need cornerbacks. James Bradbury, regardless if they keep him on the roster, this would be the last year for his contract anyway, and barring any kind of an extension, which I don't think is coming. They're going to need cornerbacks ultimately. So I'll give you some names that I might keep an eye on during the draft if they somehow fall down to the Giants. One guy that comes to mind is Clemson cornerback Andrew Booth. He is a junior. And to talk a little bit about him, he's 6 foot, 194 pounds, 13 games as a freshman, and just a press zone combo corner who has good size, good length, and plays with, who's a very competitive cornerback. Just a lot of balance, strength, foot agility. A guy I really, really like. He has some good measurables, and a guy who's still on the board. And I wouldn't mind seeing the Giants grabbing him. I think, He's obviously not as tall, quite as tall as James Bradbury, but listen, he's got enough length, I think, to where he could be successful if need be, if he's chosen in that second round, which is where I project him to be. So I'd like to see the Giants maybe look that direction. Another guy that I think could be on the Giants' radar. Now, this is a safety, and he has not been taken yet, which I'm kind of surprised, is Baylor safety Jalen Petrie. Now, we know, folks, the Giants are paper thin right now at the safety position. Their only experienced safeties are Xavier McKinney and Julian Love. They need a safety, plain and simple. Jalen Petrie is 5'11", 198 pounds. Petrie is a converted linebacker, so he's a guy who I think if the Giants want to put in that star linebacker role or drop him back, he can do that. Speaking of the star position, it's a position I believe Petrie played at Baylor. Is he going to be able to do that role as in the NFL? I think he can, but obviously it's something worth trying out. Worst case scenario, you put maybe Xavier McKinney in that role. But the guy just, his stock has been rising ever since the Reese's Senior Bowl. He has great character, great football IQ. He has to have great football IQ. The star position requires versatility and the ability to process what you're seeing. In terms of his speed, doesn't maybe have the ideal speed you want as a safety, but look, this is a great prospect for round two. Needs to play a little bit lower in terms of his tackling. Sometimes he'll tackle a little too high. But look, again, a lot of the weaknesses or areas to improve are coachable. And, if the Giants are thinking of having him as the star linebacker, I don't know if he has the frame to do it, but certainly a player that I think has a lot of intangibles to like, if we're being honest. So he's another guy to take a look at in the second round. Now, who are some other guys? Let's take a look here. I mentioned Petrie, Chad Muma, inside linebacker of Wyoming. Now, I don't think the Giants are going to go inside linebacker in round two, maybe in round three, but also I could potentially see the Giants not even going inside linebacker today because they do have some other pressing needs that they might want to address. But look, if they do address inside linebacker, Chad Muma is a guy to keep an eye on. Muma played his college ball at Wyoming. He's a 3-down linebacker with size, speed, and instincts. Covers well. He was really good in zone coverage. Does a good job reading the quarterback and reacting accordingly. And he has enough size, I think, to man up on tight ends. So you combine all that with his aggressiveness as a tackler and a nose for the football, and you have a guy who I think can really be an impact and who, as a potential 3-down player, can give you really good value at that spot. So that's a guy I would like to see considered as well. And not just, also for round two. This could be like round three and stuff. I don't know if these guys are going to last that long, but, I'm just mentioning day two picks in general here. Donovan West, the center out at Arizona State, with Tyler Linderbaum having gone off the board. Donovan West is a guy that I know I've been intrigued by as a potential interior offensive lineman that can be developed. And, he has really solid technique, Donovan West. And John Feliciano is going to be the center, as we know, this year. But he's on a 1-year deal. They brought him in to get the offense up and running. I could potentially see, though, a young center that the Giants might draft either on day 2 or day 3 being developed to take over for Feliciano down the line. So something to keep an eye on there. And then one other name I'll mention, a cornerback, just going back to cornerback, Zion McCollum from Sam Houston. He's 6'2", explosive, agile, and he's fast. I think he ran a 4.3 in the 40, if I'm not mistaken. For all the intangibles, for all the good stuff that McCollum has in his game, he's probably slid down because, Sam Houston, we're not really talking a major college program, so maybe the level of competition is the reason why he slid down. But this guy has the potential to be a steal in this draft if, depending on who takes him, obviously. But, you know, he's a guy that has good ball skills, who gets his hand on passes to break them up, and just, does a really good job with sticking with receivers. So he's a guy I would certainly keep an eye on as well. So what do I think the Giants are going to do in day two? I would say probably, if I had to take a guess, I'm going to say at least a defensive back. I think there might be another interior offensive lineman taken. And I could potentially even see a receiver being taken. Don't discount the possibility of a receiver being taken, given that the Giants play, or will probably play a lot of 11 personnel under Brian Dable. Now, the receiver core, eventually they're going to have to remake that group because Sterling Shepard has a voidable year after this year. Darius Slayton, who I know was rumored to be on the trading block. I don't know that they're necessarily going to trade him, but he's in the last year of his contract. Is Kadarius Toney going to finally snap into place and show the potential that everybody thought that he had last year? So I could see another receiver being added, definitely. So we'll see if Joe Schoen agrees, if the board aligns in that way. And it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be another fun night and another night for the Giants where the draft picks that they do select are going to have people standing up and applauding loudly for the work that they're doing. So, all right, Giant fans, coming up next, we're going to talk with Max Torres. We're going to talk Kayvon Thibodeaux and find out more about the Giants' new Batman pass rusher. So stay with us, please. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but without the calories and without the sugar. Most Built Bars contain about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, and they taste great. Built Bar offers 9 amazing flavors in nut and nut-free variety, plus a rotating limited-time offering of different flavors that changes up every so many weeks. So head on over to BuiltBar.com today and see what their current flavor lineup looks like, and use our special promo code LOCKED15 to save 15% off your first order. Again, that's code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. My name is Patricia Traina, and as I promised, we have special guest Max Torres. He is the publisher of Ducks Digest. He also has a podcast called the Ducks Dish Podcast. Say that 10 times fast. And Max, happy to have you with us. Happy to talk a little bit of Kayvon Thibodeaux.
Yeah, happy to be here, Patricia. I'm excited. It's draft season. All the months of hypotheticals are building up, and we're finally getting some answers. So I'm psyched to be here.
All right. Well, I'm psyched to get to know Kayvon Thibodeaux. Really excited that he fell down to the Giants and that the Giants picked him up. So, Max, let's start off with what kind of a player, overall person, player, what exactly is this whole package that they're getting that is Kayvon Thibodeaux?
KT, yeah, he is the whole package. I feel like that's a good way to put it, Patricia. He's someone who was an instant impact player at Oregon. Wasn't a starter right away, but they definitely felt his impact as a true freshman. Really had his coming out party against Utah in that 2019 Pac-12 championship game. Made his presence felt on special teams, and then really emerged as that premier edge rusher that the Ducks needed and frankly haven't really had in a while, since the likes of Deion Jordan, who went, I believe, 3rd overall to the Dolphins in 2013, if I have my years right. So we're talking about a high profile edge rusher, someone who's incredibly explosive off the edge, really, really athletic, and, can do it all. I feel like that's one of the areas that he grew throughout his college career, is defending the run. I'm sure we're going to talk about that in this podcast, but he's certainly developed a little bit of a reputation as someone with a big personality, especially throughout this draft process. I remember I was at Oregon's Pro Day in Eugene when he got asked that question about what's the most ridiculous thing that you've heard throughout this draft process. And he was very confident in saying, I think the most ridiculous thing that I've heard in this draft process is that I'm not the best player. And he believes that he's proven it, on the field and in every way that you look for. So he's someone with a big personality for sure. So perfect for New York, right? And then someone who has, proven himself at a pretty high level and shown up in the biggest games, I believe, since he's been at Oregon.
I want to talk about his run defense because that does seem to be the big question mark about his game. And he was asked actually about that during his introductory conference call with New York reporters last night. And he basically, his answer was, well, go look at the tape. I have looked a little bit at the tape. I haven't looked at it in great detail. Haven't had time yet, but I will. But I want to get your take on his run defense. Are the criticisms overblown, you think, or is there really room for him to grow in that area?
I think there's some room for him to grow in that area, Patricia. But I think it kind of lends itself to him as a prospect because you're talking about a guy who went fifth overall, and I think is still very, very raw. I think that was one of the things that we heard a lot throughout the evaluation process is that he's done some great things at Oregon, maybe wasn't as consistent as he'd hoped to be, and as a lot of these teams that are selecting in that top 5 pick range would hope to be. But I think that he really developed not only as a pass rusher, still plenty of work to do there, but as someone who can defend the run and not just be known as an edge rusher. He can do more than just get after the quarterback. He really chiseled out his frame, 6'5", 250 range during his college years and showed that he developed that strength to get under guys and get in on the interior and have more than just an impact in the passing game.
What's an area of his game that you think still is a little bit underdeveloped besides maybe that run defense?
Yeah, I'd probably say his technique is the biggest thing that steps out, which I think a lot of people are saying. But the more I've thought about it, I think that makes sense. That's probably part of the reason that Aiden Hutchinson went before Thibodeaux in last night's draft, because I think that you look at his game and just how he played during his 3 years at Oregon, and he did win a lot just based off of sheer athleticism, off of power, the bend that he had around the edge. But he kind of has a little bit of a limited toolkit is what I would call it. And I think part of that has to do with some of the coaching that he received at Oregon. Not to be too critical of them, but I think that there were definitely some head scratching moves with Tim DeRuyter last year, who was the defensive coordinator for Oregon. They had him dropping back in coverage every now and then, but he also he was smart rather to disguise some of the uses that he had with Kayvon. But he worked with someone that a lot of people know, like Von Miller, when he was at A&M. So there were some high expectations there. But I think as far as his development as far as his technique goes, there leaves a little bit to be desired. And I think that's where I see a tremendous amount of upside. You see a guy who has all those physical gifts, the bend, and those traits that pop off the page, but maybe we can get some good coaching for him in New York, and that can really allow him to take that next step.
I don't know how much you've gotten to know him personally, Kayvon Thibodeaux, but based on what you do know about him, kind of on the field versus off the field, we talk about culture all the time in the NFL, probably also in college as well, and that importance of everybody kind of fitting into the locker room culture, being leaders, not being distractions and whatnot. What can you tell us about Kayvon Thibodeaux off the field, his personality? Is it the same as what we see on television? Is it somebody who's maybe a little more, laid back, or what?
Yeah, I think it's kind of wild, Patricia, because I've covered Kayvon since he's been in college, and I feel like he got more outspoken this year, but I feel like he still backed it up to a pretty good degree on the field. Some people are talking about his consistency and his motor. Had that ankle injury that obviously didn't really help him reach his full potential. But as far as his personality, he's someone who I'd say is very loyal to where he came from, growing up in South Central Los Angeles. And the whole narrative about his opportunity, and he wants to use that to give back to his community. He's already started the Dream Foundation. And I believe a central part of that is giving back to the community. I think he wants to start a school. So he's someone who's taking all of the buzz and hype that he's getting, and he's leaning into it for sure, but it's not one-sided. He sees the position that he's in, and he wants to use that to give back to his community, which I think is really respectable, and definitely a good place to start off your NFL career.
Sure. And you mentioned he has a foundation, you said?
Yeah, I think it's called the Dream Foundation. I'm trying to pick up a little bit more information on the fly here. But he's talked about that and just being passionate about giving back to where he came from and kind of serving as an example for other young athletes or people in that community to just go after their dreams.
And certainly he's living out a big dream of his, I'm sure now. What about on the field? Again, you want guys that can lead, but can also mesh in with what's being done. It's kind of a tough balancing act, if you will, because ultimately, depending on the game plan, depending on the defensive coordinator, you're going to get some guys who are going to shine a little bit more than others. I mean, is he the type of guy who needs to be the center of attention or wants to be, or is he okay with if one week maybe he's not as featured as much?
That's a great question because I think we didn't really see much of that in his college career. He was always the center of attention. When people thought about Oregon, they always thought about Kayvon Thibodeaux. But I remember I asked him a question about where he thinks he's grown throughout his college years, and he said that he looks back on his freshman tape and he gets sick watching it. So I think that he's someone that's probably used to being the center of attention, but just based off of the way he's conducted himself throughout his college career, I think it'll be a little bit something new to maybe not be the center of attention, but I know that there's a lot of good pieces already on that New York defense. Leonard Williams, Azeez Ojulari. Hopefully I'm saying that right. That was a bit of a tongue twister. So it's maybe something that Oregon fans aren't used to. But I don't think he needs to be the center of attention. And I think it could be kind of cool just to see how he's going to shine and maybe a little bit of a complimentary role as far as, being the face of the defense, since they already have some really talented guys.
You mentioned a little bit about how sometimes he was dropped back into coverage. What primarily did they ask him to do in that defense? Was it just pretty much rush the passer? Was it, just hold the line? I mean, what exactly did they ask him to do for the majority of the time?
Yeah, for a majority of his time, he was supposed to be that bona fide pass rusher. But I think part of the reason that he maybe didn't look as good as some people expected, I think his final stat line was 31 games, 19 sacks, which I think was 7th in program history, if I'm remembering the numbers right. He didn't have another bona fide stud on that defensive line with him. He had some solid contributors for sure, but it was a much different situation than we saw at Michigan with Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo on the other side. And he could kind of get schemed around a little bit. He could get doubled and, that'll kind of take it out of you. And then if you can, as an offensive coordinator, scheme around that guy, then it makes it a little bit easier to dissect the defense. So he was mainly asked to be that pass rusher, but he also did make strides in defending the run, like we've talked about a little bit. So that's kind of what his duties, mainly entailed. And with him being disguised, I think that Oregon was trying to maybe do that to open up some opportunities for other guys on that defense to shine. Noah Sewell is the biggest name on that defense now heading into 2022. So maybe that's a little bit more context on how they were trying to use him last year and during his time at Oregon.
What's something about him that Giant fans are just going to absolutely fall in love with, other than the personality, which seems to be very outgoing, very, embracing of the challenges ahead of him? I mean, what's another thing, the football thing, obviously, but give us something maybe not a lot of people know about.
Sure. Oh man, that's a good question. You're putting me on the spot. So that's how I know you're good at your job, Patricia. Man, I think just the wow plays are really what's most exciting for this fan base. I think back to the start of the season when they played Fresno State and he just slammed into Jake Haener and jarred the ball loose and just got a super fast jump off of the line. So I think, there's going to be that adjustment, right, where we'll probably have some plays where, all right, Thibodeaux, see, you're not in college anymore. You got, these grown men that are NFL veterans that are ready for you. But I think that he'll surprise people in his rookie campaign with just some of those plays that are like, yep, that's why he was drafted when he was in the top 5 and seeing that sheer power and that twitch and that bend. I think those are some of the things that really make him special. So hopefully that answered your question. It wasn't maybe something that people didn't know about him, but if I were a Giants fan, that's what I would be most excited about.
Well, it's certainly been a long time since the Giants have had that on a consistent basis. And one of the things I like about this young man is that he brings the quote-unquote dog to the defense. He's got that alpha dog mentality, I think is how they describe it. And the Giants defense hasn't really had that in quite some time. They've tried to bring it in. The other thing with the Giants defense that I love about, this whole pick, as well as the Ojulari pick last year, is they're finally replanting the seeds and getting some homegrown pass rushers, which they kind of let dry up after they traded away Jason Pierre-Paul. So, it's really good to see them replanting those seeds, and it just sounds like they got a good one. I mean, this kid, I didn't think he was going to make it down to the Giants at 5. When I saw the board starting to fall the way it did, I was like, oh, there's a chance, there's a chance, there's a chance. And here he is. And I'm just absolutely excited about him. All right, Max, before we call it, we end the segment and say goodbye. Tell everybody if they want to find out more about the Oregon players, especially if the Giants draft any more Oregon players, where can they find your work and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Patricia. You can find more of me at ducksdigest.com, covering the Ducks for SI. And then you can find me on Twitter at mtorresports. And then I also have a YouTube channel, Oregon Football Max Torres. So those are some of the best ways to find me. And I'm sure that we're hoping to see some more Oregon players taken here in this draft. But Kayvon was really probably one of the only can't miss guys. But Verone McKinley at safety is another one that's kind of in that conversation, maybe to get drafted.
All right, great stuff, Max. Appreciate it. Giant fans, we'll be right back after this. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us here on the LockedOn Giants podcast. Again, thank you for your patience while we put this podcast together. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you keep it here on the LockedOn Giants podcast, the YouTube channel, the audio. We're going to have more on the Giants draft, day 2 wrap-up, summary reactions, and a whole lot more. Also, be sure to check me out over on Giants Country, where we have additional coverage of the New York Giants 2022 draft. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.